Okay. So again, we're going to be discussing grad school essays today. I'm sure you're all aware of that. We're going to talk about 3 different types of essays. We're going to talk about statements of purpose, personal statements, and diversity statements. I'm sorry, one other thing. You can also put questions into the chat if that's easier for you. Statements of purpose, just to give you a little bit of an introduction to each of these 3 different statements. Statements of purpose are where you're going to focus on a discussion of your academic interests and your goals in undertaking a graduate program. So it's really focused on research and career goals. The personal statement is where you discuss your values as an academic and how your personal background relates to your academic pursuits. And then the diversity statement is where you're going to discuss how you're going to contribute to the diversity of the student body through your identity, and then also your research and activities. So let's start talking about the statement of purpose first. And again, in order to make time for me to cover all 3 of these, I've kind of made this a pretty minimal presentation. So if there's anything that you want to speak about or hear about more along the way, again, that's a great thing to let me know about, and I can stop and talk about anything that needs more detail. So here's an example prompt for a statement of purpose. Give a brief statement outlining your reasons for undertaking a graduate program and your particular area of specialization. A few just kind of introductory remarks about the statement of purpose. A typical length for a statement of purpose. There may not actually be a typical length, but there's maybe like 3 different typical lengths. So one very common length that you'll see is 2 pages double spaced. Another is 500 words. And then the third, which is a little bit frustrating sometimes, is they just won't give you any limit. So you can include as much as you want. In that case, I would still probably think about this in terms of maybe a 2-page statement. I've seen character limit. Yeah, character limit is another way that they'll sometimes break it up. That one's a little bit less common. And then also sometimes, usually they'll have you upload like a Word document or a PDF. Sometimes though, they'll have you input your statement directly into like a box on a website. And in that case, oftentimes there'll be a word character limit. One suggestion to go back to this real quick is that when you're writing your drafts, don't worry too much about the length. Get a good draft down of your statement. And then after you've got a good draft down that does everything you want it to do and says everything you want it to say, then worry about trying to cut it down and make it fit the word limit. So don't worry about word limit too much at the beginning. There's kind of standard components of a statement of purpose that you're going to, any statement of purpose pretty much is going to have these same sections, these same paragraphs in it. So there's going to be an introduction. There's going to be a section where you discuss your research experience or any other experience that might be relevant to your graduate studies. Your research interests and aspirations. And then a concluding section and statement about your fit with the program. Each one of these sections should be about 1 to 2 paragraphs, depending on how much space you have for your essay, and also how much you have to say. So 1 to 2 paragraphs each. So now I'm going to go through and kind of break down each of these sections a little bit and tell you what ought to go into them. And again, this is pretty formulaic, so you can kind of stick to this formula. What would be in the intro? Great. Yeah, I'm about to get there. Thank you, Miranda. So the first thing that you want to mention probably in the first sentence is the name of the program to which you're applying. So I want to enter the PhD program in physics at UC Irvine. Some form of that sentence. It doesn't have to be exactly like that, obviously. The next thing that you're going to do after you've named the program is that you're going to discuss your research and your scholarly interests. So you're going to do this in sort of clearly an introductory way. So it can be a little bit broad and general at this point. Okay, so what you want when you're thinking about how you're discussing your interests in the first paragraph, think about how you became interested in your field. Think about the tie-in between that inspiration and your current research interests. And then what is it about your field of study that motivates you to pursue ongoing research? People will oftentimes tell a story in the first paragraph here. So when you're answering this first question, how did you become interested in your field? What you want to do is demonstrate that you have a deep commitment to research in your field, a deep or a long-standing commitment to research in your field, that you're really committed to going on to doing this as your career. So showing them how you became interested in that is a good way to convey that sort of deep interest in your research. So people oftentimes talk about maybe an experience or a research project or a professor or a book. It could be anything, whatever it was. If you can think back to some of those times when you realized that this was something that you really wanted to do, tell one of those stories. I'm not gonna lie, I feel how I got interested in my field, it might be a little bit cliche. Well, perhaps, but I mean, I would say give it a little bit more thought. I think there's probably in your life, there have been probably, I would imagine, this is a big assumption, many experiences that have kind of confirmed to you, I'm speaking directly to Emily right now, sort of, I'm sure there have been many experiences that confirm to you that math is the right thing for you to do. There hasn't probably just been one cliche moment. Probably, I imagine, been several experiences that you've had that you could draw from. And I assume this would go for all of us. Are there any questions about the introduction? And I mean, I guess even if the way that you got interested is a little bit cliche, I suspect that that's not going to keep you out of grad school. I think the most interesting thing is, or the most important thing is not that you have some sort of completely original story to tell them here in the first paragraph, but that you're conveying, again, that deep interest in your field, and that you're showing them what you're interested in and why.
Yeah, I guess I do have kind of like a follow-up question to this kind of structure. I'm guessing some of these parts I kind of feel will be elaborated like later in like a personal statement. Like for example, the last bullet you have, like what is it about your field of study that motivates you to pursue ongoing research? I think you could also probably tie that to like your university, like, well, why do I even want to go to your program? So like I guess, do you just keep it kind of not brief where it's like dry and boring and I want nothing to do with it, but also not too detailed because you might get to it later?
The way that I would think about it is that the personal statement, certainly you don't want it to be dry and boring, but the statement of purpose, it's focused more on your research and your academic work, where your personal statement is going to be a little bit broader. So here, when you're talking about what it is that motivates you to go on, I would do that in terms of like an intellectual interest that I have, like a commitment to my academic field that's motivating me in some kind of an intellectual way to go on. And then in your personal statement is where you might speak about how you have, again, more personal reasons why this is important to you, because somebody you know died from cancer, and so now you want to go into cancer research. That, again, that's not really an intellectual motivation so much as a personal motivation.
I see the distinction now. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions so far? Or things that I could speak more about? Okay. The next section is going to be your research experience. And if you don't have a lot of researcher experience, you can also bring in other relevant experience that you might have. So showcase your research and any kind of like learning experience, maybe in the classroom. that you have that's relevant to the type of research that you want to do in grad school. When you're discussing your research, a research project, there's kind of again, it's sort of a formulaic way that you can think about doing that. So the first thing that I would do is introduce what the research question we're working on was, or what the problem was. Then explain what you did, and then explain the outcome. So anytime you're introducing or talking about a research question, these are the 3 things that you ought to do. This is what we were trying to do, this is what we did, and then this is the outcome. And when you think about outcomes, you should think about these in 2 ways. So the first way is, how did we actually answer the research question? And then the second way is, what did we produce? Did we write a paper? Did we have a poster or a conference presentation? So think about outcomes in those 2 ways. Does the research experience you have need to be the same as what you want to get involved in during grad school? No, so your research experience does not need to line up perfectly with what you want to do in grad school. It's certainly obviously nice if it can. If you are planning to do something different, that's totally fine. What I would do in that situation is, again, try to show anything that you have that is relevant. Try to frame, even if you have things that are not directly obviously relevant, you could try to discuss them and frame them in such a way that you can show how you think that they are relevant. And then a last thing that you ought to do in that scenario is sort of explain this transition. So this is the stuff that I've done, this is my experience, and in the future, I'm going to be departing from what I've done in the past. And then just explain why. Or could you twist it and be like, this made me interested in this new topic if we want a story progression? Yeah, definitely. So it's okay, yeah, it's okay that you didn't like figure everything out and get lined up perfectly for your PhD program as a sophomore or a junior. That's totally fine, nobody expects that. So if there's gonna be some sort of a transition as you move into grad school, that's completely fine. You just need to explain it. And if you can, tell them how your research is still relevant, or you've learned relevant methods or things like that that are gonna prepare you. So Dahlia asks again, say you're interested in a specific type of chemistry, and wants to get involved into a different field of chemistry at grad school. Yeah, that's probably a conversation that is best had with your faculty mentor, but I suspect, I don't know a ton about chemistry, I'm in religious studies. I suspect that there's no issue with that. Generally, it's okay, even if you were studying chemistry, to move into a different field altogether. I'm no longer gonna study chemistry, I'm gonna study biology or physics. You could still make that kind of transition. What audiences are we expected to be communicating to? Professors in your field. When we write about our research, can we assume the person reading it is in our field, or at least knows enough about it to know the meaning of key terms or the background of the field? Yeah, so you can assume that they're gonna know generally key terms, but many of our fields are pretty broad. And so some of the key terms that we have in our fields might not even make sense to other people in our fields. For example, I'm in religious studies and I study Christian history. There are certain terms that I would use in my research about Christian history that somebody in religious studies who studies Islam might not know. And so that admissions committee is going to be professors in your fields, but remember your field is pretty broad. And so there might be people working in an area of your field that has nothing to do with what you're working on. So you can use key terms, just make sure that they're general enough that they're going to be known by everybody in your field. Was that okay? Does that help?
Is there another slide or more bullets to this?
Yeah. I'm just trying to
Okay, I'll say my question then.
Okay. Another thing that you want to do here, when you're discussing research, you want to demonstrate your fluency with the discourse of the discipline. So again, this goes to the last question, I think, using key terms. You can use them to a good extent. This is probably going to be the longest portion of your statement. And if you have a lot of experience, if you've done a ton of research, remember to focus on what's most relevant to your plans in grad school. And so if your first research experience was in the biology lab, and then you switched over to physics, and you've continued to do physics ever since, and you plan to go on to do physics, you don't need to say anything about that biology lab. Unless it's, again, for some reason relevant to what you want to do. For example, assume they are in physics, but not biophysics. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you're studying biophysics, you would probably assume that the people who are reading it are going to be in the physics department generally. Yeah, of course. Okay, this is my last bullet on research experience. So are there any other questions here? Remember this section, you're not in this section. I think that a lot of students, when I see their first draft, are kind of like trying to build the case that are like, they're ready for grad school. Like, look at everything I've ever done. I'm gonna like pile in everything I've ever done so I can prove to you that like I've actually gone through an undergrad program and I'm ready for grad school. That's not what you're doing here. You're not like pleading your case at this point. At this point, you're trying to show how you have research experience that lines up, hopefully, with what you want to do. So it doesn't have to mention everything you've ever done. The next section is where, so now you've already mentioned your research experience. Now you're going to mention your future research interests. So what do you want to do in grad school? What do you want to study in grad school? And it's okay to be specific. I think that a lot of people are in their first draft are a little bit afraid to be specific, or maybe don't even really have a specific idea quite yet. It's okay to be specific. No one is going to hold you to what you write here. So you can write a project that you intend to pursue in grad school and then get into grad school and no one's ever going to look at this again. So you can do something completely different and no one's going to bat an eye about it. The reason why it's good to be specific is because this is how you start to build your case that the program that you're applying to is the right program for you. And you start to build that case by doing this because you say, this is the specific thing that I want to study. And I know that your program is going to be a good place for me to study this specific thing. What if we don't know what specific area we want? Should we just pick an area to write on anyway? Yes, that's what I would do. I mean, don't just pick some random area to write on and make something up completely out of nowhere. I mean, you've got a little bit of time to think about it. I would start to think about, seriously, what do you think is something you might do in grad school? Are there other questions? So again, you'll talk about how this builds on or departs from your undergraduate work. So again, it's okay if you're making a transition to some other type of research, just explain that transition. What do you intend to accomplish while in graduate school? So again, that kind of goes with the first question, what do you plan to study and what do you intend to accomplish? Don't be too vague here, because again, you need to tell them what you want to do so they know whether or not their program is a good place for you to do it. So this is my last bullet here. Are there questions? Can you give an example of the last bullet point? Sure. So, I mean, I think really the most important thing is that you tell them what you plan to study in graduate school and what you plan your research to be. I think the difference in this last bullet point is that, I don't know, you could tell them, explain to them how you are going to be working towards your long-term goals in grad school. You don't state potential advisors here. We're going to state potential advisors in the next section. So this is just the section where we're talking about what I want to do.
Could this relate to like career goals as well? Like, let's just say like, oh, I want to be a professor. Oh, I want this industry job that requires a PhD. Is that something you would include in the section as well?
You could include it in this section, or that you could include in this section or the next section. These two final sections kind of work together to build the case that this school is the right school for me. So here you're going to talk about your research interests and what I want to do in grad school. And then the next paragraph is where you get really specific, and we'll just move on to it. Let me see if there's another question. Are we expected to come up with our own research or hop onto a professor's project? That really depends on your field. And so again, this is something that I think would be good for you to speak about with other grad students in your department or professors in your department. Yeah, that's all I can say about it. I know that in my field, I had to come up with my own project. I'm not sure how this works in STEM. Okay, so this last section is your statement of fit with the program. So now that you've told them what you want to do, you're going to tell them why this is the right place to do it. So what attracts you to the program and why in general? Then more specifically, why this specific institution or university? Why this department or program? Why this location? As Emily asked, you should mention professors you want to work with, potential advisors, including a few sentences about the research and how it relates to what you want to do in grad school. Mention any kind of specific resources that the university has that you might be able to take advantage of in your research. So labs or centers or programs and degree emphases that are all going to help you to complete your research and also to achieve your long-term goals. And then discuss how this program will help you meet your long-term goals. So you really have to make the case and spell it out for them. This is what I want to do in my research in grad school. This is what I want to do with my career. And then this is why your department is the best place for me to go about getting there. Is there a golden number for professors to list? I think people usually include 2 to 3 is a good number. Are there any other questions?
So this seems very focused on the research aspect of things. So it's not so much as like, in terms of like campus, department, cultural fit.
That's more stuff that, again, would likely come in a personal statement.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? I think this is the last one. There's one more slide on statements of purpose, just the conclusion.
Wait, Chris, I had a question on the last one. So the last bullet point, it kind of relates to the last bullet point of this slide, right? So how do we make the distinction for like each part?
I'm not following the question.
So the slide before this one, it talked about like what we would accomplish in grad school.
Mhm.
And so what if we said if it was like to accomplish our long-term goals, would this also be answering this last question on this slide?
So yeah, on this here, on this, you're not going to be thinking about like so much what you want to accomplish, but how they have specific things that are specific resources that are going to help you to accomplish it.
Okay.
So in the last paragraph, you mentioned your long-term career goals. And now in this one, you mentioned how this program is going to help you to meet those long-term career goals.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions here? Okay, and in the conclusion, just briefly, finalize and reiterate the themes of your statement. The conclusion, I really didn't say much about. Usually, I think that students just kind of end with their fit paragraph, and there's maybe like a concluding sentence that sort of reiterates the main themes about like who you are as a researcher and your values as a researcher. You could reiterate those types of things. It usually comes just in 1 or 2 sentences at the end of the fit paragraph, unless you maybe have a longer statement, one of those statements with no word limit on it, then you might have a full paragraph that does this. Oh, one more bullet I just saw. Don't beg them to accept you. This is kind of a warning, a tip for you. I see this in a lot of first drafts. In the very last paragraph, people start to get really beggy. Like, I would be so honored and thrilled. I would just love it if you would allow me to work with the great professors in your department. I would be so wonderfully honored. Don't do that. Try to think about making this more of a professional communication. Don't beg them at the very end.
Okay. So in terms of, well, I definitely see how begging is problematic, but so this shouldn't be viewed as like a letter, right? So you wouldn't say thank you for your consideration or anything like that.
No, it's just kind of like an essay. It just ends.
Okay. Okay. Because I could see how like the begging part might sound sort of at first nice for like a letter, but it's definitely not a letter.
Yeah, these are professors. They're fact-based people who are looking for like reasons to admit you into their program, and a flowery sentence at the end about how thrilled you're going to be and you're going to love it and your life is going to be fulfilled. That's not facts that are helping them make this decision. I mean, of course you're going to say something like that to get into grad school, right? And anybody's going to say whatever it takes to get into grad school. Try to stay fact-based. Give them evidence. Any other questions about statements of purpose? This is the last bit for statements of purpose. We're moving on after this. Okay. The next one is the personal statement. This is an autobiographical essay. I hesitate with that term autobiographical, but it's an autobiographical essay that reveals your values and how they relate to your research interests, pedagogical approach, and career goals. Demonstrate a deep and longstanding interest to your field. The reason that I hesitate a little bit with the term autobiographical here is because it's not a story about your complete biography. It's not an autobiography about my entire life. It's still going to be pretty focused on who I am as an academic. So it's about my life, my broader life, specifically as it relates to my research interests, pedagogical approach, and career goals. Here's a sample prompt for a personal statement, a long one from UCSB. Describe any aspect of your personal background, accomplishments, or achievements that you feel are important in evaluating your application for graduate study. For example, please describe if you have experienced economic challenges in achieving higher education, such as being financially responsible for family members or dependents, having to work significant hours during undergraduate schooling, or coming from a family background of limited income. Please describe if you have any unusual or varied life experiences that might contribute to the diversity of the graduate group, such as fluency in other languages, experience living in bicultural communities, academic research interests focusing on cultural, societal, or educational problems as they affect underserved segments of society, or evidence of an intention to use the graduate degree towards serving disadvantaged individuals or populations. So this is a very super detailed prompts. It tells you a lot about what they want. I've got a question here from Emily. Does every department want varying levels of being personal? So I would say yes. That's a really great complicated question. I think, and I have heard this from Don Asher, who is a guy who goes around lecturing on this stuff, that there are sort of different degrees of being personal and sort of, I don't want to say emotional, but sort of being personal or emotional or mushy in your personal statement. If you are in a math department, they might not want that as much as if you're applying to an English department. There might be more room for that kind of super personal statement in an English department than in a math department or a physics department. So this is another good reason why you should show this. I haven't mentioned it yet, but once you've got your drafts, you should show them to people in your department, grad students, and certainly professors in your department, and get their feedback. The writing staff at the university is certainly a great first place to go, but you also want to make sure that somebody in your department looks at your statement. What if you have a disability? Absolutely mention that. And Emily makes a great point. The prompt sounds like a diversity statement. So yes, this prompt does sound quite a bit like a diversity statement, and it is combining. So that's one thing that I realized I should have mentioned at the very beginning. I've laid these out, these 3 different statements. Let me go all the way back to the beginning. I've laid out these 3 different statements as if they are what you're always going to see. You're not always going to see these 3 statements with these clean demarcations in the way that I'm explaining them to you. Sometimes a statement of purpose will be combined with the personal statement, and we'll see an example of that. Sometimes the personal statement will be combined with the diversity statement, and Emily just pointed out how we saw an example of that. So there are these 3 types of statements. Sometimes they'll be combined. So you really need to pay attention to your prompt. Some universities might only even ask you for one statement, a statement of purpose that does everything. In that case, you're still going to want to make all of these same moves according to the prompt. You're just going to have to do it all in one statement. So this next one is also going to be a little bit combined. This is a statement of purpose / personal statement. A personal statement of 1,000 words or less from the applicant describing his or her background, interests, plans for graduate study, and career aspirations. The statement should include a discussion of some experiences and ideas that have shaped those interests, plans, and aspirations. So you can see how this one is combining. It's asking about your research interests and plans for graduate study, but also describing your background, ideas and experiences that have shaped your interests. Okay, so let me show you. Oh no, I should have animated this one, sorry. Let me discuss some of what you're gonna write about in a personal statement. So I've already mentioned it's not a general broad autobiography of who you are as a general person. It's who you are as an academic. So try to have a message and present a very curated image of yourself as an academic. Make sure that you're presenting an intentional image of yourself as an academic. Discuss personal experiences that relate to your research interests and academic goals. Discuss obstacles that you've overcome. Also, if there's no diversity statement, this is where you would include your statement of diversity. And then these are always really good techniques to try to be unique and memorable, and to try to use dramatic storytelling techniques. So a dramatic storytelling technique, people in writing often refer to that as the difference between showing and telling. And so rather than like telling me you had a rough childhood, you would like kind of dramatically relate the story to me. So transport me back to a time, a specific experience where you were having a difficult time as a child. And tell that story in a dramatic way so that we actually like feel your emotions and things like that. And then a last thing that you can do with your personal statement, just in case you did perhaps like have only a 500-word statement of purpose and there was a few things you couldn't get in, you can always use your personal statement to fit in anything else that you couldn't fit into your statement of purpose. How long is the personal statement? Again, these are all going to be varying lengths depending on your program. So it could be, again, this anywhere from 500 words to 2 pages to no limit. I would say in my experience, personal statements tend to be shorter than statements of purpose. So I would probably count on about 1 page. Double spaced. Another thing that you can do in your personal statement, you don't need to do, but you can address any kind of blemishes that you have in your record, in your academic record. COVID, I don't understand, Emily. All right, so mention any kind of blemishes that you have in your record, but only if they're major. So if you got like a C in one of your classes, don't bring it up. But if you had to withdraw from a quarter at UCSB in your undergrad, then you would need to explain that, or you ought to explain that. So major things that are going to show up on your transcripts, explain. These things should hopefully be resolved. If it's the type of thing that can't be resolved, like maybe you have an ill family member that you have to take care of sometimes. And because your family member was ill, you had to withdraw from a quarter at UCSB, but your family member is still ill. And that's a problem that's not going to be resolved. You might have to go help them in the future. So if the problem hasn't been resolved, you should at least be able to explain how you have a strategy for dealing with it again in the future. So that when I'm in grad school, I'm not going to have to withdraw from a quarter. I've got a strategy now. And then also include a statement regarding what you've learned or how you grew, how you grew by overcoming whatever this was that happened to you. When you're mentioning obstacles that you've overcome, or when you're mentioning blemishes in your record, try not to let it get too dark. Try not to linger on horrible, terrible things that have happened to you. Certainly mention them, but what you want to focus on is how you've overcome and how you've grown. What would you consider major? So again, like I said, if you got a C in a class, that's not major. If you had to withdraw from a quarter for some reason, if you had to like drop all your classes 1 quarter and leave the university for some personal reason, that would be pretty major. Then I would explain that. Does anyone have any questions about examples of things that might or might not be major? What about withdrawing from 1 class? If you had to withdraw from one class and it was because of some significant life thing that happened to you, I would explain it. If you had to withdraw from a class because it was too difficult for you and you were just not getting a good grade at the end, that's not the type of thing I would bring up. It's good also if the admissions committee, the readers are going to sympathize with the blemish. And so if it's something like I got a D in my class because I went to Coachella or I was working as a promoter for Coachella all quarter, and so I just did really bad, they're not going to feel sorry for you. So it should be something, again, that they're going to have a little bit of sympathy for you, hopefully. Are there other questions about addressing blemishes? So 1C isn't major, but what about a streak of Cs? If it was, again, the type of thing where it was some sort of a major life event that then caused me this one quarter to do badly, regardless of what the grades were, I would mention that. If you were just struggling with courses or something like that, and you don't have a reason for doing it, C's due to COVID, this is a good question. How to bring up COVID, because I think that the problem with bringing up COVID is that we've all been through it. And so it's difficult to kind of claim that as like a personal thing that has affected your record. If you can show some way clearly how COVID impacted your life and impacted your studies in such a way that you then got lower grades, that would make sense to me. Like, COVID happened and my mother got ill, and so I had to take care of her and I got C's. But if it was just like COVID happened and then I got C's, it happened to all of us. So there would have to be some sort of, I think, a specific explanation of how COVID caused you to do badly. Make it unique to your life circumstances. Absolutely, yeah. Tell them what happened. Okay, any other questions here? So now the diversity statement. This is where you're going to show how you're going to contribute to the diversity of the student body. Mention how you already have contributed as well. So not only how you're going to contribute to the diversity of the student body in your graduate program, but also how you already have contributed to diversity through your research, through your campus involvement, and any other personal experiences. Could you list future clubs, SACNAS? Yep, definitely. So you can mention anything that you are already involved with or anything that you've already done. And then also anything that you hope to do in grad school that you want to be a part of. And again, this is a good place where you can, again, identify specific things that they have at their university that you would like to join and be a part of. Remember to think about diversity not only in terms of your identity, but also in terms of your research and your campus involvement. Any questions on this one? I think this one's really short. This is all I've got on it. I've got a sample. So describe how your background or experiences will enhance the diversity of the University of Chicago community. For example, based on your culture, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender, ideology, age, socioeconomic status, academic background, employment, or personal experience. So not only who you are, but also what kind of work you've been doing to support these communities. Are there any questions about the diversity statement? I think this one's kind of the most open, and so I don't have a ton to say about it. I think that it's pretty clear. Okay, so just a few, these are strategies that I think are mostly aimed at the personal statement and the diversity statement. You could use these in either one. So a good strategy, as I've already mentioned, is to tell a story. This is from that guy, Don Asher, that I mentioned before. So this is a quote from him. "I once interviewed a medical school admissions committee who let a woman into their school because she had been in a plane wreck. Is that a qualification for medical school? He says probably not. I would say certainly not. Probably not, but it is a qualification for getting noticed if you are otherwise qualified for medical school." So it, it is good to be able to make these statements memorable, to make sure that you're noticed, so that at the end of the day, at the end of the week, however long these professors are sitting in that room reading dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of applications, they're still going to remember you. They're still going to remember that one essay about the woman who was in a plane crash. And then they can go back and give your application a second look. Try to be memorable, try to be a little bit different, give them a little bit of a hook so they can remember who you are after they've read dozens of these things. Be sure to provide evidence for your claims rather than just adjectives. So adjectives are not evidence. Instead of providing adjectives, tell a story about specific events and show how these events make you memorable, and also provide evidence for the qualities that you want to convey about yourself. So don't write something like, "This is full of adjectives. I'm an excellent researcher with superb analytical skills and meticulous attention to detail." You've given us a bunch of great adjectives, but nobody has any reason to believe you. There's no evidence of your research skills or your analytical skills or your attention to detail. If you tell us a story about something specific that happens that shows this, then we have evidence. Working in Professor Jones's lab, I gained leadership skills by organizing lab meetings and helping to train new members of the lab. So now I know you have leadership skills because I can see exactly what you did. I can see the evidence there. Other questions about this? Okay, so just some more tips here. Try to make your first paragraph, be sure that it introduces the main ideas for any essay that you're writing. So make sure that any kind of points that you're trying to get across in your statement of purpose about who you are as a researcher, or your personal statement about who you are as an academic and your values, make sure that your first paragraph introduces those main ideas and themes. It's good if your first paragraph can be interesting and vivid. And so I've already mentioned one good way to do that is by telling a story where you sort of transport us back to the moment when you became inspired to pursue your career. These other examples of ways you could do this to make it interesting by relating an epiphany. So when you like had a great idea, you could take a bold position, something that's unexpected, make some sort of an unexpected claim. These are all good ways to draw your reader in. Use your last paragraph to summarize the main points and represent the image of yourself that you want the committee to see. So again, think about this as an essay, not as a letter. I think that was a really good distinction that Emily made earlier, that this is not a letter, it's an essay. So just like a regular essay, your introduction is going to introduce what you're about to say, the main ideas and themes, and then the conclusion, the last paragraph, is going to sum everything up again. Again, just like a regular essay, use topic sentences at the beginning of each paragraph in order to make your narrative easier to flow. So at the beginning of each paragraph, tell us what this paragraph is going to be about, what it's going to be doing. Provide signposts along the way to remind the reader of the characteristics you're trying to convey about yourself. So after you've mentioned those main themes and values and ideas in the first paragraph, bring them up again when you're talking about them. Use the same language so that the reader knows that you're mentioning this again. And then avoid repeating information from your CV unless you're going to expand upon it. I see this in a lot of first drafts as well. There's a ton of repetition from the CV. You have to trust they really are going to look at your CV and they really are going to pay attention to what's on there. So you don't need to bring stuff up again here unless you're, again, expounding on it and explaining more. Assuming they have you submit one. I imagine they will. I don't know that I don't think I've ever heard of one. They didn't ask you to submit a CV, but yeah. Okay, any questions about any of these tips or this advice here? How should talking about research differ between the CV and the statement of purpose? Yeah, so the CV is where you just sort of list things that you've done. You're not really talking about anything on the CV. It's like a resume where it just lists everything. And then in the statements is where you actually get to discuss stuff and flesh it out. So on the CV, it might have a research project listed, but in the statement of purpose is where you're going to explain, this is what we were actually trying to do. This is our research question. This is how we approached it. And these are the outcomes. Does that make sense? Okay. So we can use CV as specific examples in diversity statement. I'm not following you, Denise. Can you explain?
So like the stuff we did on like the CV, we can use like those experiences to like expand upon like what we mentioned in the diversity statement. Like I remember you said like provide like specific examples like when you're telling a story. So would that be like, I guess in a way doing that, like using some stuff like in CV, only if you're expanding on it?
Yeah, so the examples that you draw on for your diversity statement could be things that you have listed on your CV, or they could be things that are not listed on your CV. So, for example, if I was writing my diversity statement, I would definitely mention that I worked at the McNair Scholars Program, and that's also on my CV. But when I mention it in my diversity statement, I would talk more about what I actually did and the students that I helped and the kind of interactions I did and how that affects the type of professor who I want to be. So I'm going to do all that more interesting stuff in the statement. On the CV, it just says McNair Scholar Writing Specialist. That's all it says. So you get to flesh that out and talk about how this experience relates to your future goals in the diversity statement.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it can be from the CV, but it could also be something that is unrelated to the CV. Like I also worked at the public library in Santa Barbara for a while. That doesn't show up on my CV because it has nothing to do with my academic research. But I would still probably mention that in my diversity statement because I worked with a broad, diverse population and I worked at the public library. So I could still mention that. Like paneling or outreach. Will this PowerPoint be available on GouchoSpace? Yes, I will post this on GouchoSpace. I will post it to each of the McNair pages and also the Edison page. I think DS would also help you show your actions were not performative resume builder too. Emily, I'm not following either of your, okay, I think diversity statement would also help you show your actions were not performative. I'm not following either of your last two comments, Emily.
I guess like, I don't know, think like when you do, some people that I've noticed, like I've read applications on my end that like sometimes you can tell like a person just did it because like, oh, it's something to add. But I think in the diversity statement, you could kind of like expand more and be like, oh, I actually have like actual passion and drive in why I did something rather than just, oh, I did it because I did.
Yeah, definitely. So not only, yeah, that's a great point. Not only showing that it's an example of your passion and drive, but connecting it, again, I think it's important to reiterate, connecting it to your future goals. Okay, one more slide here. These are just some suggestions for getting started. So make sure that you read and understand all parts of the prompts carefully. Pull it apart. Oftentimes a prompt, as you've already seen, they'll have several different questions and things that they want you to talk about. Pull it apart and then write clear answers and responses to each part of it, each question and each thing that they want you to mention. So I would do that first, make sure I've got all their questions answered. Another good way to start is by making a list of personal qualities that you're trying to convey. And then think about personal stories and experiences that are going to allow you to convey those qualities. So don't just start writing, again, a random autobiographical essay. Have a plan, have a thesis, have certain ideas that I'm trying to convey. And then again, show your drafts to professors, grad students, and writing staff. Okay, thank you all very much for your attention. I hope this was useful. Are there other questions or comments? When is the personal statement draft due? I'm not sure. What does it say on the syllabus? Are there any other questions? I will double check that right now. But are there any other questions while I'm looking up the syllabus? Are there any other resources? Yeah, so we're gonna try to put together some sample essays and then give you a link to them. Like campus feedback or books. So sure, you've got me, certainly. There's professors, grad students. I believe that there's an undergrad writing specialist at the university. I don't know who that person is, but look for writing specialists at the university besides myself. And you could take it to those folks as well. I'm always available to look over your stuff. Would you be willing to share these slides? Yes, I will be. I will be posting these onto the Gaucho Space pages, and also for each group, I will post these. I'm not on the Gaucho Space, so if you could send me an email at the very beginning, I put in the chat my email address. If you don't have access to the Gaucho Space, just send me an email and I will forward the slides to you by email. Yes, the Zoom recording will get posted.